Well, welcome back, fourth graders, to our lesson on the Titanic. I Survived the Titanic, our historical fiction story. We're going to start with this assignment that we had yesterday, where we had to look at the sentences and see if we thought they were actual history, true, or if they were the fiction, the make-believe. Because remember, we know that historical fiction has some history and some fiction in it. Well, it might surprise you, but all 5 of these are actually part of the history. Now, don't feel bad. We were just making predictions. We were just guessing. We didn't know. We just were guessing. So it's kind of just for fun. But Mr. Andrews was actually a designer or builder of the Titanic. And if you did like a simple Google search, you would find that Mr. Andrews, there he is, was actually a real person. He really was one of the designers. Now, he wasn't the only designer and builder, but he was one of them. So that was part of history. The author decided to include this real person. And you can see the picture there. The illustrator kind of included a picture that looked very much like how he looked and dressed in the book. And so in our notebooks, when we put Mr. Andrews, the author included a real character. Just like the author also included some make-believe ones, the fiction parts of it, the author put in a real character as well. So they can do a little bit of both. That's the nice part about historical fiction. The second one, the part about the 45,000 tons of steel, that is also history. The third one about the 16 lifeboats. Remember, Phoebe was taking George up to the deck and said, "There's only 16 lifeboats." Remember, George said to her, "Well, the Titanic is unsinkable, so why would they need to have more than that?" That is actually part of its history. It did have just those 16 lifeboats hanging off the side, which unfortunately was also part of the tragedy with the Titanic. Number 4, it was over 4 city blocks long. That is also true, part of its history. And the Titanic was believed to be unsinkable. Now, we know that it really wasn't, but that's true as part of the history that people, they did believe it. They all believed that the Titanic was unsinkable. It was built so well and so sturdy, there was no way that anything could sink it. Unfortunately, that, like I said, was proved to be untrue and was part of the tragedy. But it also explains why those 16 boats were there hanging off the side instead of more. There's no way that all the people on the Titanic could get into 16 lifeboats, even if they were filled. So, based on history, these are all things that the author decided to include in the story, I Survived. So in your notebooks, you may have included Mr. Andrews then. I also have another circle here. Honey Rose has decided to put another character. There's actually a lot in this story. The sinking of the Titanic. But she put down another one that she knows was actually a real person, part of the history. And it was found here in chapter 9. If we had read on further, this Captain Smith. Captain Smith was also one of the real people. As you see here, Captain Smith, Edward Smith was his real name. He was the actual captain of the Titanic. So there's even more real characters in the story. Of course, plenty of make-believe ones as well. Like Henry, the person who was kind of like their butler. Mrs. Key, another one of the passengers on board the ship. You can see Mrs. Key down there. So the story has quite a few characters. But just so you know or realize, the author decided to include some real ones too. Interesting. I wonder why. So as you think about that question about why would the author include some of those things that are real and part of history? I mean, why put a Captain Smith in the story? Why not make up a name for a captain? Just like they made up names for these characters. Why include a Mr. Andrews, who was actually the real person who designed the ship? It kind of goes back to this last question and these things we did in our assignment. A lot of times the author with historical fiction, they want to have a big part of the story feel believable, to feel like it's It's true. And so they want to include enough history. Remember, a historical fiction story is based on history. So it can't be all make-believe. It can't be all fiction. And so they want to include enough history to make it feel believable. So all these things that we realized from today's assignment were part of the history. From these two characters that we now know are real people from the ship. The author's purpose in doing that was to give the sense of this really being based on history. So that as you find out more and more about the real Titanic and the real story, you understand and you appreciate this story, this piece of fiction. You enjoy it more to know that there is a lot of real things in history in it. And when you were looking at your predictions today, when you did this assignment and you were thinking about the clues or your reasons for believing one way or the other, sometimes the history in there is very much a feeling that you get because of numbers. You know, that's a big one. A lot of times numbers make you feel like, well, that must be true. It has a number with it. Or it has a real person's name with capital letters. But it may not be. It may be the fiction. And the author now is using that history to kind of build this up to make it feel more true or more real than it really is. But in this case, with the I Survived the Titanic, they needed to include some real characters as well. So that might explain it. For today's assignment, you're now going to go on and watch a video that has some real footage and real pictures of the Titanic. And you're also going to get a chance to search for yourself. You can see up there just a simple search of Titanic facts and figures. You'll find a whole bunch of things about the real ship, about the real Titanic. And by doing that, you're going to fill out a chart, keep track of some of those things that are the real true facts about the Titanic. All right. Well, good luck. I hope you enjoy this. I hope you look into more of the story as well over your long weekend. And we will see you back here next Monday.